All right, let's get into some real news. Enough nonsense. Enough jerking each other around here. Let's get into some real news. And by that, I mean stuff that's about 3 weeks old. But I just found it on the Kill Tony subreddit the other day. Because I don't know. I don't listen to Tim Heidecker's podcast. I don't know how many people do. But apparently he does one. And this was just on the Kill Tony subreddit the other day. And I found it very interesting. So this is Tim Heidecker on... What's this podcast called? One Last something or other, whatever the fuck it is.
Jane Marie and Carmen Christopher is what it's listed.
Those are his co-hosts, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, I guess. All right, here we go.
I think his stand-up is really funny. I haven't seen him do stand-up in a while.
No, it'd be interesting to hear him come in with some new material. He was telling me it's like the landscape has changed so much. When you're a big Tony Hinchcliffe fan.
No, I don't even. People talk about this guy. Dude, I don't even know who the fuck this guy is.
He's the GOAT.
Tony Hinchcliffe, is he the Kill Tony guy?
Yeah, man, he's the fucking GOAT. Like nobody.
Here's what's going on here, and I think it's interesting. I bet you're a Tim Heidecker fan, right, Casey? I assume.
I love everything he writes. I hate everything he improvs. I think it's one of the comedy specials you should review. His stand-up comedy special.
Interesting.
I'd pay $1,000 to watch you review that thing. It's crazy.
Okay, maybe
bizarre.
I'll check it out.
Yeah.
So what I find interesting here is like, I don't think Tim Heidecker's necessarily being wrong in some of his critiques of Tony Hinchcliffe. It's inherently wrong, I guess, because he's going into it half-assed. He doesn't know anything about the show or Tony Hinchcliffe, it seems. But he makes some points that I think a lot of like Tony's critics might agree with, at least in a sense. But what's happening here is it just reeks of jealousy.
Oh yeah.
This is where it's I think worth criticizing this clip is that Tim Heidecker is coming off as just a guy who's jealous at Tony Hinchcliffe's success because he doesn't even really know what the show is, as you're about to hear.
He also like goes after anything like pop culture that anyone likes. That's sort of his thing. So if you like it, he's going to shit on it and make some weird. I mean, but his written stuff, Mike, is amazing. But yes, he's a bizarre man.
Well, that's what I find interesting about those guys is like they do make good points satirically often. Like guys like Tim and Eric. I like some of what those guys do, but I hate when it just comes off reeking of jealousy. It's kind of like what we talked about with Mark Maron a few weeks ago, where like in the context of Busting Balls with Bobby Lee, it sounds better. It just sounds like a comedian talking. Whereas when Maron's just ranting on his Instagram, he sounds psychotic. And this is similar in the sense that like it just sounds very petty where he goes with this Kill Tony criticism.
Tony guy?
Yeah, man, he's the fucking GOAT. Like nobody ruins people better than him. Like with his insult comedy, it's fun. You're done.
It's
like,
crazy.
You should try going up against Tony Hinchcliffe and see how ruined you get.
I would rather fight him than try to do comedy with, just because I don't know who this guy is. Every time we go on tour, somebody will be like, "Oh, you're a comedian. Do you watch Kill Tony?" I'm like, "I've never seen Kill Tony."
We should find a dumb clip of him.
I would love to.
Then it's definitely worth criticizing. We haven't done 1 second of looking into this guy, so he must fucking suck. Like that to me, I think is a weird instinct, especially as a guy that does something as bizarre as like Tim Heidecker does. Someone that's in the world of doing something weird to not even check it out before you criticize. I know that's the other guy saying he doesn't know who the fuck Tony is, but like for either of them, clearly they don't know the product he's putting out. And again, I might agree with some of the things they have to say, but it just comes off as super jealous because comedy fans no one says Tony Hinchcliffe is the GOAT. I don't think there's a genuine, even like Kill Tony fans, I don't think anyone says Tony Hinchcliffe is the greatest stand-up of all time. I've never met anyone that thinks that. So I don't know like where this is coming from other than just being mad. I'm sure he hates Rogan politically in that world. And so it seems more like he doesn't like the way these guys vote, and he doesn't like that they're as successful as they are.
I think it actually is a little something more fundamental. I think he's having an argument with his brand of comedy versus their brand of comedy. He thinks he's, and I would agree with a lot of it, he thinks he's better and funnier than them, and their comedy is easy. And just like every stand-up thinks every other stand-up is doing hack shit, he's a comedian thinking they're doing hack shit, but he sits in this realm of surreal comedy where like I can sit above comedy and I can process it different than the people in it, like the Joe Rogans and these guys, and so I can make judgments on them. I think it's more comedy versus comedy than individually based, because
I'll tell you, I don't love that either though, and it's the one thing I have a lot of criticisms of Jerry Seinfeld's comedy philosophy. But the one thing I always give him credit for is like Seinfeld works very clean, but like some of his best friends in comedy are like Chris Rock and Colin Quinn, like guys that are entirely different than him, like just a totally different world than Jerry exists in. And he would produce a lot of like Colin Quinn stuff that you'd be surprised someone like Seinfeld might put their name on because it's dirtier, it's more controversial. But Seinfeld just looks at it as it's comedy. Funny is funny, whether it's my style or not. Like funny is funny, and I think this comes off as a much snobbier approach to comedy that I'm surprised someone like Tim Heidecker has. When you look at what Tim and Eric did, that would also be very easy to criticize and just on the surface and be like, oh, well, this is just hipster horse shit. Like if you don't give it a try, it's easy to just on paper be like, well, this is probably dumb.
Well, I think that's what happened. There was so much criticism. He's like, we made it through the fire. Like they have this view of like a stand-up or just a regular comedian is like not quite as talented. I'm Robin Williams. You're just doing stand-up. That's what Tim Heidecker thinks right here. And yes, it is. Yeah,
you blew it.
These like he's like a Rogan, emissary.
I guess I've learned that, but I'm just like,
they worship him.
But does he do comedy or does he just make fun of
Yeah,
people?
he's like this is him. He'll be like. He talks like this, but he's not gay, I don't think. I don't know.
This is all
whether
correct
he is
so
or
far.
not. But he's like, you're
either way.
Your headphones are so blue. They're like your blue balls. They're like your blue balls.
Hold on. This is fair. He has summarized it kind of like, now again, I do think Tony has some funnier comebacks than that, but there are moments where that could be a legitimate line on Kill Tony.
Because you don't fuck.
And so,
because you can't make girls come.
Who's he saying this to?
Like other people, friends.
Who would listen to this?
And he'll have comedians on.
And this guy's got 50 million fans.
Oh, these arenas. It's like, remember when that band Kiss was popular?
Yeah.
And you're like, why are they so popular? They're so bad. They're making bad music. They look like fools with their dumb makeup on. But they've got arenas full of dodos.
It's like marketing.
Loving him.
You just know you gotta
Marketing.
aim for the 12-year-old boy market. Sorry, guys. I know you've all been there, but
Sure.
yeah.
No, it's-
Well,
that's why
I
those
was into
people
Kiss when I was like
exist.
7.
Yeah.
And then you kind of wise up.
Yeah.
And you hear real music.
It's such an interesting, like, sweeping under the rug what Tony has done, because, again, I don't think Tony's the most talented stand-up out there or anything, but you do have to respect what he's built in that it was an underground thing for a long time. Like, it's within the last few years really skyrocketed, but it was just another, like, moderately successful podcast for a lot of years. And before that, it was nothing. Like, the early years of Kill Tony, no one knew what the fuck it was. It was just underground, essentially. So to just kind of shit on that and give it zero respect without really knowing what it is, just under the guise of like, oh, this is a Rogan guy, so they're not funny. It's like what Tony has built, and a lot of it is like, again, I think you can absolutely shit on products that have come out of Kill Tony. I don't think it's necessarily the best crop of young comedians is who's being highlighted on that show. But to just be like, oh, it's for retards, that's just not true. And I think it becomes kind of like hack and cliche in its own right to just when something gets successful and now it has millions of views, be like, well, it must suck then,
Yeah, haters gonna hate. I think that's what this comes down to. He's just, he has a ceiling with the surreal comedy that didn't allow him to get into Madison Square Garden with Tim and Eric. They did a lot of shows, a lot of live shows in theaters, not Madison Square Garden. So I'm sure there's something to that.
There's an interesting thing to a lot of counterculture guys, because I always go back to Stern with it, where Stern would shit on the industry so much and yet really wanted to be a part of it. And I think you see a little of that here from not exactly the same, but in the sense that like Tim Heidecker is shitting on the industry. It's like, oh, anything that's popular fucking sucks. But really what he's saying is, why aren't we that popular? And it's like, I don't know. I've heard a little bit of his podcast, and it's like, I think there's a reason it's probably not super successful, you know?
It's a hard listen. I've said it before, and I'm a huge
Yeah,
fan.
yeah.
There's multiple samples being played all the time under what he's saying, and none of it goes together. It's jazz, but the bad kind.
Yeah. Yeah, I just think there is a difference, and we criticize a lot of shit, so I'm not saying Tim Heidecker. If I'm allowed to criticize shit, Tim Heidecker is certainly allowed to. But
Yes.
where it becomes disingenuous to me is like, we'll play clips and break stuff down. Tim Heidecker is just kind of going like, oh, that's successful. I guess he fucking sucks. He's a hack. And that's to me where it reeks of jealousy more than any actual opinion.
Which is crazy because he made Tom Goes to the Mayor, which is maybe the funniest cartoon ever. So it's like someone with that cachet. It's like Larry David getting mad at an open mic comic. That's really the level of, as far as comedy minds in my head. Like, why are you even bothering with a Kill Tony? Who cares about Kill Tony?
Yeah, that's why this Heidecker clip or like certain things Marin says stand out to me, because it sounds like petty open mic stuff. It sounds like stuff you would hear at an open mic where it's like, man, fucking, I can't believe fucking, pick a name. Matt Rife is a good one right now, where it's like, I can't fucking believe Matt Rife's so successful when I put so much work into my craft. It's like, well, Matt Rife has worked pretty hard also, write better jokes and do better crowd work, I guess, and maybe you'll be Matt Rife. But it's surprising. Like that's very natural for an open micer and naive of them. It seems shittier to me when it's someone that's had the success that Tim Heidecker's had. But
I come from the music world, and that's why the comedy world's so special, because they are so like high school with it. Like if someone does better than you just go back in and write another song. You just take another stab at it. In the comedy world, they're like, oh, that bastard, he got my spot. It's a very like zero-sum game over there. That's why it's fun. They're all depressed.
But yeah, I like when guys like that talk shit if they're willing to back it up. Like, go on Kill Tony and make fun of it, or have Tony Hinchcliffe on or something. Like, if you're
Brilliant.
willing to do something to back that up, then I'm all in. Then that's great. But it's like, I've noticed being on the Kirk Minahan show, like when it started, Kirk would get into sort of like political or cultural arguments with people and invite them on the show, and they'd be like, oh, Barstool Sports, I'm never going on there. Or, oh, you just so you guys can shit on me. Like, they don't want to have the argument. And it's like, well, that's the coward's way out. What you're actually doing is proving that you have no validity in your point. Like, you don't actually believe in what you're saying. You don't think you could argue with someone. Whereas the person that's inviting you on is actually coming from the correct perspective of, well, show me why you're right, And I get the sense Tim Heidecker wouldn't do that, because it feels that's what feels shitty to me, is like it's just shitting on it because Rogan is adjacent to it,
Yeah, that doesn't seem fair. That's and the thing is, dude, Hinchcliffe deserves shots. He deserves shots, but that one seems,
Sure. Well, we talked about him last week, where it's like,
yeah.
Why is he being like that? And like, again, the criticism of some of Tony's like roast jokes or whatever being, shitty to some of the bucket pulls, that I get, but just being like, why is this successful seems petty to me.